like as a thing.
All right, we're live. So take it away, everyone, and I'll see you after.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Kate. It is so nice to be here with three of my personal, very good pals who also write with Carina Press, Rachel Reed, Katie James, and Katie Casey. So we are also really appreciative of Love Sweet Arrow for hosting our conversation on sports romance as part of their third anniversary celebration. Obviously, we'll be talking about some books today. So I just want to remind everyone that you should head to lovesweetarrow.com for information about buying books, as well as any links to future events happening this weekend or in the future. Love Sweet Arrow is able to sell both like hard copy books as well as ebooks if that is your preference. So whatever you need, they have got you covered. And you can also get 15% off any purchases that you make all weekend in store and online with the code 3 years in celebration of their 3-year anniversary. So we really hope that y'all will take advantage of that and go support an awesome independent bookstore, since I know that is why so many of us are in this game. So for the audience, we just want to remind you that we are going to be on a 2-minute delay. So we will be taking questions from the chat, but do just note that I and the other in the panelists will not be reacting live. So there may be a little bit of a delay before we're able to answer questions. That's just how Love Sweet Arrow has the broadcast set up to get from Zoom to YouTube and Facebook. So just be mindful of that. If we don't react, it's not that we don't love you and don't value your input. It's just that we will hear about it 2 minutes later. Yeah, so we'll plan to be here about an hour, have great conversation about lots of books, kind of our reasons for being in the romance game and in the sports romance game specifically. And yeah, so without further ado, we're going to do some real quick icebreaker questions to get to know everyone a little bit better. But before we do that, if everyone could just maybe go around, I'll call on you just in the order of the Zoom circle and introduce yourselves. So let's start off with Rachel.
Hey, I'm Rachel Reed. I write the Game Changers hockey romance series for Carina. I'm in Nova Scotia. I don't know, that's it.
What are you drinking, Rachel?
Oh, beer.
Nice, a classic choice. All right, Katie.
I am Katie James. I write the Firebirds hockey romance series for Carina, which include Too Much Man and the upcoming Too Hot to Touch. And I am in Philadelphia.
And what is in your very classy glass?
Oh my God, this is the best glass ever.
Yeah.
I love it so much, from Williams Sonoma. It is a homemade sidecar.
Wow.
Which is my favorite cocktail.
I think you win the award for most classy beverage presentation.
I'm really a classy person, yeah.
Heck yeah. And last but certainly not least, Katie.
I'm Katie Casey. I write the Unwritten Rules series with Carina. So Unwritten Rules, which was out last October. And then Fire Season, which comes out in July. And there's actually a third one that'll be out in April. I am in Maryland and also my beautiful guest room. And as a result of recovering from surgery, I'm drinking water from a bottle.
Beautiful. So healthy. Love that.
Yes, but Katie, I'm very jealous of that cocktail. That looks beautiful.
All right, and I guess I didn't actually introduce myself, so I will do that. But I'm Kate. I am beaming in live from my living room in Virginia, drinking a glass of Prosecco. And I am also working in hockey romance. I write the Trade Seasons series also for Carina. Seasons Change came out in February, and then the second book, Contract Season, will be out in September, which feels very close and very far away at the same time. All right. So now let us actually get into the icebreakers. So I just got back from vacation, which is why I am very tan right now instead of the exact same color as this white mantle behind me. So what is your dream summer vacation, and what about the main character of your most recent book? Rachel. want to get us started off?
For me, like I've never been to continental Europe. I've barely been off North America. So I would really love to see like Italy, Greece, France, all the places. Any of them would be great.
Classics for a reason.
Not so nothing too original. I think for my main characters, like I think like if I'll go with the most recent book, so Ilya and Shane would probably just like to go on any vacation where they can just openly be together and not hiding. So maybe like maybe again somewhere very touristy in Europe, big cities, just walk around holding hands would be nice.
I want that for them. All right, Katie, how about you?
My favorite summer vacation is to go to Cape Cod, but I do that a lot. So if I was thinking like dreaming big for a summer vacation, it would probably be going back to Tulum in Mexico, where I went once a long time ago. And it was like, I mean, just the most beautiful place I've ever seen. I love the ocean and the beach. And it was just like ocean and beach all over the place. It was so great. I just loved it there. So that would probably be my dream. For Piper and Gavin from Too Much Man, I feel like Piper would want to go somewhere tropical too, like somewhere she could really relax and just not have to think about work, not have to think about anything. So maybe the same as me, which probably says something about my writing of the character.
Right, what you know. Right, what you know.
And I think Gavin would just go wherever she wanted.
Awesome. And then Katie?
So I should have mentioned I write baseball romance, not hockey romance like the rest of the panel. So this is going to sound very, very on brand. My ideal summer would actually be going to every major league stadium.
That's
I really
awesome.
want to check that off. I also, and this is not a summer vacation, but I also really want to go see Dominican Winter League baseball in the Dominican Republic, and would love to go see some more games overseas as well. So in the DR, in Puerto Rico and Mexico, and then over in Korea and Japan. That seems like a modest vacation.
Small. It's just barely any travel at all.
No travel, definitely no money. So because my main characters are all baseball players, they all work during the summer and get like 3 days off during it. But I think all of them are ocean people because I'm an ocean person. So like Katie, I'm like, well, I like the ocean. My character is all gonna like the ocean. So for the book that's coming out in July, Fire Season, one of the main characters is really into scuba diving. So would probably go scuba diving. I actually looked up, can like professional baseball players go scuba diving? And the answer is yes, they can. Their contracts don't prohibit it.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So now that we have dream vacations out of the way, we're going to get back into a little bit more of the weeds of writing. So do you think it is harder to write gameplay, whether hockey or baseball, or sex scenes? We're gonna do a little change up, which I do believe is a baseball term, since I just read it in Fire Season, my arc last night. Katie, why don't you go first this time?
I would say writing a hockey game is much harder. In fact, I didn't do it at all in the first book in Too Much Man. And I did it once in the book that comes out in July, Too Hot to Touch. There's only one game scene, and it like served a plot point, but I was like, I got to get out of this game. Like, I got to get out of writing this game as quickly as possible. Cause I mean, not to be too explicit, but I have never played professional hockey, but like the other stuff I have a little bit of experience with. So it's just easier to write, I guess.
Rachel.
Oh yeah, definitely sex scenes are easier. I think I struggle with any kind of action scene because I really like writing dialogue and emotions and not so much actions. So I do find it difficult writing like an imaginary hockey game. So a lot of my hockey scenes do have quite a bit of dialogue and like thoughts. and not so much a play-by-play of what's happening on the ice. But yeah, some people are really good at writing that, and I admire them, but it is not my favorite thing to write.
I respect it. And last but not least, Katie.
So I was gonna say that baseball is much harder to write than sex scenes. Because like there's not a batting order normally, and like you don't have to keep track of the number of outs or strikes or anything. But Katie, I appreciate that.
I mean, maybe.
There's usually fewer than 10 people on the field. Usually, I'm just saying usually, not always, but usually. Baseball's a lot more turn-based, obviously, than hockey. Like, I think writing a continuous play sport is just much harder in general than writing a turn-based sport. So I was like, oh yeah, no, baseball is definitely more difficult to write. But then what I realized was like, because I've been revising something today where someone's like, you got to fix your sex choreography, and I'm like, damn it. Ugh. In baseball, you can just like, and in sports, I think you can just sort of like elide it with like, yeah, like they, made a tape to tape pass, or, the pitcher came set or whatever, versus like, and that like implies something to a reader that's vaguely familiar with that, versus in sex, you have to be like, well, their elbow was here. And so I was going to revise my answer and be like, it's actually a little bit easier for me to write baseball choreography than sex choreography, but keeping track of all the other stuff is harder.
Yeah, Katie,
Oh,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I also want to hear your answer on that one.
Yeah, I am actually going to line up on team sex is harder. For hockey, like, there's kind of a set, at least in terms of like the type of writing that I would be most likely to do in a hockey romance, where like you want it to be approachable. I'm usually not trying to do anything like super fancy or technical, because I want it to be approachable for people who don't have a background in the sport. Like there's only so many pieces of vocab, there's only so many kind of like types of action that I would realistically be trying to kind of convey and get across. But sex is just so damn messy. There's all these feelings. It really matters where that hand is. Like the body positioning is just so technical. So I have a hard time like keeping all of that straight. And then you add the whole emotional component, which is just like a lot deeper and more nuanced, I think, at least than what I have generally tended to write in the kind of on ice scenes. Although maybe I should explore Rachel's path of doing a little bit more self-reflection for my characters out on the ice. So I think sex scenes are really hard to write. I actually think they're like the hardest thing for me to write like at all, pretty much. So yeah, I would, if anyone needs like a hockey scene writing ghostwriter, like call me up.
Me.
Great. Perfect. We'll collab on whatever we're doing next.
Good.
All right, last quick little icebreaker. We've talked about the sports that we are comfortable writing very, very much in our lanes. But if we ever had to step outside of the kind of like baseball or hockey lane to write a new sport, what would it be? And KD, why don't you go first this time?
Oh no, I don't have an answer.
No. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I was like, is it cheating to say women's baseball? It is cheating.
I have softball.
Women's baseball. It's
women's
different.
Baseball. I was trying to get you like a little farther away from baseball.
Yeah, no. So I used to watch hockey and football pretty seriously. So I would say probably either one of those. The sport I'm least equipped to write is definitely basketball. And again, that continuous play I find be maybe the hardest. But I think I've read a bunch of basketball romances and it's been great. But yeah, I would say either hockey or football, I would find more or less easier. And I kind of want to get into F1.
F1 is so fun.
Yeah,
it's so
I've heard that.
Yeah, no, my husband is a huge fan, so I've kind of become a fan by osmosis. But I think F1 romances are an untapped market, and I would love someone to blow the doors off of that one. How about Rachel next?
I feel like I'd want to. My uncle's been on my back about doing a professional competitive darts romance because it's untapped.
Also
But
untapped.
something like that I think would be fun, like a sport that's just never written about, like yeah, some sort of a little bit niche sport, something that they throw on like the TSN 5 late at night kind of thing. Like one of those would be really fun. Yeah, so you know what, I would try darts. I have to learn how to play it first, but I think it would be something like that would be really fun.
Heck yeah, love that. And then Katie, I saved you for last because I know we're gonna have the same
You already know
answer.
my answer.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. It would definitely be some equestrian sport, probably dressage, either dressage or hunters. I would actually really, really love to write a dressage romance. I'm really into that. But it would be like way more detailed and get way more into the weeds than I do with hockey, because it's something I've done, something I've experienced, is something I'm like super nerdy about in a way. I mean, I'm nerdy about hockey too, but as like a fan, not as a athlete, obviously. So I would definitely do that. Dressage romance is the future.
Heck yeah, love that. I actually, unrelated horse girl note, I actually just got a new dressage whip. It's waiting for me on my front porch. It has
How exciting.
It has rose gold accents. I'm very
Oh my
excited. I was like, what is the bougiest dressage whip I can possibly buy?
That's the great thing about dressage, is like you can get really into like, it's so bougie, and it's like, yeah, it's so much fun. Like there's a lot of like fashion and like visual aspects to it that are really fun.
Yeah, and if anyone couldn't tell by my answer to that being that I currently have a brand new dressage whip that I'm really excited about, my answer would also be equestrian, just like Katie's. Probably not dressage though. I'm more of a combined training girl, or maybe a little field hunting, fox hunting if I want to just go wild. But yeah, all right. So that was our lightning round. Now that you know probably way more about dressage and its accoutrement than you and our audience ever wanted to know. So we're going to kind of dive into our main bigger discussion questions, starting with one that is always, just obviously a classic for romance, but for our panelists, could you tell us a little bit more about how you came to write romance, and then sports romance in particular, and how you kind of brought those two things together? And whoever can go first. I'm going to stop calling on people.
Okay, I'm gonna go. I love sports like my whole life. So I've been watching hockey since I was really young, like elementary school. So I definitely kind of came to it from like a love of hockey first. But I generally just really enjoyed the romance plot in any book, movie, TV series, anything, video game. So yeah, I was just drawn to that kind of writing. So I guess it was sort of like a write what you know situation, where I wanted to write a romantic story, and I thought, I know quite a bit about hockey and I should put that knowledge to use. So that was basically it to get me started.
Yeah, I think we're all very glad, speaking for myself, I'm very glad that you put those two things together. All right, who's up next?
Well, I'll go from there because Heated Rivalry was the first sports romance I ever read. So
same.
Oh.
I was a romance reader beforehand. Like I think the first romance I ever read was KJ Charles's Think of England, and so I was like a historicals. I love secondary, not even secondary. I love sort of like B plot kind of stuff. So if there's a mystery, if we're gonna hunt ghosts, if there's gonna be, the not technically the Stanley Cup because it's probably under copyright Stanley Cup.
It's under copyright.
Yeah. So any kind of secondary stuff, but yeah. So Heated Rivalry was the first one. So I kind of came at it from two perspectives. I've actually only watched baseball since since about 2005. So the Nats were not a thing. I grew up in the DC area. I grew up in DC. And so the Nationals were not a thing. And then they kind of came to town, and I was like a casual fan for a number of years, and then kind of tipped into I would go with a deep baseball fandom. And that kind of turned into a write what you know, with being attracted to romance and things like that. So this is the super nerdiest part, is for the book I have coming out in July. I actually wrote an article for Baseball Prospectus as part of the research for that book, because one of the pitchers in it like can only throw one kind of pitch. And I was like, who else is a one pitch pitcher? Let me do like a big thing. And so I wrote it up for them. So when I say nerdy baseballness, I mean genuinely nerdy. But it was just kind of the put your two hands together kind of thing of deep interest, and then really liking stuff that has a strong secondary plot to it.
Yeah, I mean, Katie, I think that care and affection and like deep knowledge of baseball is so clear in all of your work. From, I'm not a baseball fan. I don't have I don't have any expertise, but like I can read your books and I can just be like, this person breathes baseball. And I think that's just such a valuable perspective to be able to bring, both for kind of like the B plot aspect, but also how that informs the way that your characters process things, experience the world, the lenses that they use. Like you can really tell that you're someone that knows that about baseball culture and then knows how to put that into a romance. So
make them smooch. And I'm incepting everyone on this call into baseball, just like slowly, FYI.
It's working.
I know.
It's true. She really is.
It's because they smell good.
Yeah. And they look good.
Yeah, they really look good.
You start out looking at like cute butts, and then you're wearing I'm wearing a shirt that says unionize the miners. So like it's a continuum.
Yeah. All right. And Katie, how about you?
Now I'm thinking about baseball. Yeah, it's really like insidious.
The long game is working.
It is. Yeah.
Actually, that's Rachel's title. Sorry.
Yeah. I was like sitting in front of the TV the other day and like I didn't even realize it. And then I was like, oh, I'm watching baseball. Like what's happening to me? So I have been reading romance since I was like 11, because my mom was a really big romance reader. And she always just let me take her books. So I was reading romance forever, and I kind of wanted to try writing it forever, but I didn't really think I could write fiction. I wrote poetry for like many decades. And then I just figured I would give it a shot. And I didn't start writing romance until about 4 years ago. And the first couple of books I wrote were not hockey romances. I had no intention of actually writing sports romance at all. And then for various reasons, I just found myself like needing to write something just for the joy of writing it, like just to find like the joy in writing again. And so like Too Much Man is like one of those kitchen sink books where you're like, I'm just going to throw in everything that I like into this book because I'm going to like writing it. And so hockey is something that I like very much, although I did not grow up watching hockey at all. I grew up watching baseball and football in Boston. But I had been increasingly becoming a hockey fan as I've lived in Philly for the past 20 years. I'm like a diehard Flyers fan, which is really rough, honestly.
It's a tough life. It's
really tough. No one warned me about that.
I knew.
With the Bruins.
I knew. Oh God, no.
Yeah, I don't like the Bruins. Much to my mother's dismay, unfortunately. So when I just was thinking about all the things that I liked and wanted to write about, hockey was one of them. And it just like seemed like a no-brainer to make the hero a hockey player. And then that opened up like, all of the stuff that opens up, like writing about the sport, learning about it, nerding out about it. So it ended up being really fun.
Yeah, awesome. I think, finding that joy and just putting all of the things that you love in a book is just such a good way to kind of approach writing. I feel like, this is me getting on my little soapbox, but I feel like a lot of times, like when people are talking about writing, it's very much like the drudgery of like, this sucks, this is hard. But like for me, like it's always so helpful to be able to refocus on what is that kind of like joy, that inspiration, that passion that made me interested in something, that made me kind of want to engage. And I think having that interest in whatever it is, whether it's a sport or like the Regency period or ghost hunting or some mashup of all of those things, which I personally would. Well, I don't think there was hockey in the Regency, but I'm assuming that there was cricket. I don't know. I'm going on a rabbit hole right now. But so speaking of inspiration, and kind of like the challenges and the joys of writing, what inspired your most recent book? And then what was challenging about writing it? Before I would like you to wrap up with what is your favorite part of that book? What brings you joy about it?
I'll go first this time. If I can remember all those questions.
Oh, sorry. What inspired your book? What was hard about writing it? And then what brought you joy about writing it?
Okay. So like I said, Too Much Man was just really inspired by wanting to write about a bunch of different things I liked. And the book that I have coming out in July, which is the sequel, was basically inspired by the pandemic, and deals with a lot of like issues of overwhelm and things like that. So two very like different inspirations, I think. One book really came out of like joy, and the other book really came out of struggle. But I think they both have a lot of joy in them, and a lot of inspiration, because I really try to pull from places that I know, things that I know, people that I love. So both books really have that in them. Too Much Man was really inspired by the town where I live. So I said at the beginning, I'm in Philadelphia. I'm not actually in Philadelphia. I live just over the border in New Jersey, in a small town where a bunch of hockey players actually live. And a lot of that book, it's probably pretty obvious from the book, like a lot of that is inspired by, I just think it's really interesting to view professional athletes who are so famous and widely seen as, you know, like regular humans, which they are. And what does it mean for them to be regular humans in a regular town surrounded by regular people, which they are. And so that was really a huge amount of the inspiration for that book. The hardest part by far about writing Too Much Man was my own, this is like going to get real deep, just warning, was my own internalized biphobia. So the heroine of Too Much Man is bisexual. And so she's obviously, you know, Piper is the heroine, Gavin's the hero. She ends up with the hero, obviously. So she ends up with a cishet man and a hockey player. So
like extremely masculine.
Oh my God. Yeah.
On the
so
scale
like
of masculine.
Yeah. I hadn't really like thought all this through when I started the book. Cause again, I was just like, I'm going to write about stuff I like and I'm interested in. But it was like really, really hard for me because I went into it thinking this is a queer romance, right? Like, of course, it's a queer romance. The heroine is queer. And I really found myself struggling with that. Like, how can I call this queer? Even though it is, you know, it has a queer heroine, it's written by a queer author. But I really struggled with like, how can I finish this book and call it queer? Like, how can I make this a queer book while like having it be a male female relationship? Like, and after a while, you know, all of that is like stories that I'm telling myself, you know, it's all internalized by phobia. Of course it is queer. Of course she is a queer character. It is a queer story.
I was thinking that while I read your book and also while you were just talking. So it's a queer story. It is.
And so eventually I kind of got like really angry about it. And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to write this story because it's the story that I know. It's the story that I want to tell. And it is a queer story. But I really stopped writing it a couple of different times just because of that, like those external stories that I had internalized. I must knock my computer off the table. So that was definitely the most challenging part by far. And what was the third part? The part that I liked the best?
Yes.
Is that it? My favorite parts of Too Much Man are when Piper and her friends are all together. By far. Those are my favorite parts to write. Those are my favorite parts of that book. That friend group was really based on the friend group I had in college. We all lived together in a house. And it was something I was really missing when I was writing. So like that dynamic is one that I'm really familiar with and I really enjoyed writing. hopefully people like reading it. But yeah, those are my favorite parts.
And I mean, I was going to say, like, when I was reading Too Much Man, one of the things that struck out to me is kind of like the most I mean, there's a lot of different ways to be kind of queer, but one of the things that struck me as kind of like the most queer about your treatment of that book was those really important, you know, queer platonic, you know, found family community relationships. So I thought that that was really a kind of beautiful way to show Piper's identity, even as she was kind of, I mean, in the book, struggling with and kind of entering into, you know, this relationship that might be perceived as, you know, perceived by others as not so queer. But I think having that really strong relationship, and then in my arc of book 2, it was really wonderful to kind of see how that relationship has, you know, continued to grow and, you know, followed her as they are kind of, as she and Gavin are entering the next stage of their life. So I mean, I thought that was really, really beautifully written and really important. So yeah, I liked it. All right, who wants to follow that? Guess it's Rachel.
All right. Yes.
All right, if you need
I mean,
a reminder.
the inspiration for my book was
Inspiration?
the book before it. Like, it was a direct sequel, so
Heck yeah.
yeah, I mean, I kind of had to write it. There's it was a story that needed to be finished. So I think, like, the hardest thing about writing it was that I knew that a lot of people had a lot of expectations for this book, and I knew that because they told me. So I was like,
You're so
that there was,
patient,
like,
Rachel.
there was, like, a lot of things that I wanted to make sure were addressed in the book, whether they would go the way everybody wanted them to, or not. I left up to myself, but I wanted to make sure that things were kind of at least addressed. So, you know, I went into it with a pretty long list of things that I needed to deal with. And so, yeah, I think writing a book, it was definitely the first time I wrote a book that had that many, you know, expectations. So I felt a lot of pressure writing it, but I think also the best thing about writing it was just, it was immensely satisfying to be able to return to those characters and finish their, or at least mostly finish their story. Because I know it's like, sounds really cheesy, but I think it's pretty relatable for a lot of authors. But those characters, like, take up space in my head, like, kind of live there, and it was really nice to kind of get them out of there by writing the more of their story. So yeah, that was definitely the best part, and having it done was also the best part.
Heck yeah. And I mean, as someone for whom Shane and Ilya have also continued to occupy a little bit of mental real estate since I read that book, I'm very glad that you did get that over the finish line. It was really,
pass them on to other people now.
Yeah. They're
your problem now.
They're out there. You've done your work. All right, Katie, last but not least.
Sure. You're officially gifting them to the internet? Like, make your fan art.
Please. You're on your own.
There's some really good fan art.
There is some really good fan art.
There is some amazing fan art. I am blown away.
So for, I guess, what inspired me and kind of challenged are kind of the same question. This is for Fire Season, which comes out in July. So this is, it's the second book in the series, but it's actually a prequel to the first book. So this one takes place about a season before the events in Unwritten Rules. It has two characters that are also in Unwritten Rules, and I really wanted to kind of tell their story. I put them in the background in Unwritten Rules, but the main character of that book is a tad oblivious to what's going on in reality. He's not bright, but he's sweet, so we love him. So I wanted,
and that is really why we all write sports romance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. What I'm currently drafting, like, these two fools could not figure out their way out of a wet bag, but it's fine. They're in the bag together.
And they're happy about it.
And they're smooching, so it's all good. So for Fire Season, it centers around one of the characters who has a substance use disorder. So he's in recovery for having alcohol use disorder. And I knew at the beginning sort of that I wanted to write a Stars and Scrubs book. So one character was going to be like a superstar, Hall of Famer kind of guy, and the other was going to be like barely clinging on. And I felt like that there's an archetype within baseball, like it's a little mini archetype of like the sort of alcoholic journeyman relief pitcher is just like a character that recurs in baseball fiction. And I wanted to revise that because it's often really either played for comedy or kind of cheap tragedy in a lot of kind of ways that it's told. So I wanted to revise it a little bit. So I knew kind of going into it he was going to be in recovery, and he's and I say this at the content notes at the beginning of the book, he's sober the entire book. So I don't spoilers, I guess, if you care about spoilers.
If it's in the content note, it's not a spoiler.
Yeah, it's the first sentence of the content note. I thought that was really important. So that was, I guess, like the inspiration. This character wasn't actually Jewish in his original conception, and I revised the book and converted him. I have no memory of revising the book, by the way. It was 3 weeks. I'm sure I lived through because I got a book out of it, but I don't remember. And so part of it was really, and this turned out to be the most enjoyable part, I guess, of the book for me, was writing about his relationship to recovery through like a Jewish ethical lens, because most people I think are familiar with 12 steps, which, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous does a lot of good work, and a lot of people really find a lot of meaning in it, but it's actually a Christian program. So it was started by a guy who I want to say was Methodist. Don't quote me on that, but it is explicitly Christian, and a number of the later steps are kind of specifically theistically Christian. And so I wanted to write a book that was about a lens of recovery, but through a Jewish ethical approach. And I want to be clear, the book is not like inspirational fiction or anything. The character is like on the page, kind of agnostic, the way that a lot of Jewish folks are. And so that to me became the really like super enjoyable part of it, was getting to kind of explore that aspect of recovery and sort of how you, the word is in Hebrew, it's teshuva, which means like to return to being on the correct path. So it's repentance, but it's closer to like you've kind of strayed and you're kind of coming back. And so that to me was the most meaningful part of it. I dug writing that part. And I also have to give a big shout out to a second reader I had who provided a lot of assistance for the mental health rep, because I got a clinical psychologist to read through it, to give me some notes, who is also my sister. So yeah,
it's always nice to have it in.
I was like, can you read this? She's like, this is kind of spicy. And I'm like, yeah, I don't need feedback on those scenes. I need feedback on the other scenes, but thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think in all of the books that are represented on this panel, I think the kind of mental, emotional, physical tolls and kind of the interactions of those three things of being a professional athlete show up in all of our books. So, I mean, I think, I'd love, I mean, Katie, you've talked about this a little bit of kind of like reclaiming and kind of interrogating that kind of narrative that appears in baseball fiction. But Katie and KT and Rachel, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, why that theme is something that you think appears in your work, and why you think it's important to address that through the lens of romance fiction specifically.
Katie, go. I'm thinking.
I mean, I think it just, for me, it stems from like, I have a lot of anger towards professional sports in general, like on a lot of different levels. I'd actually really love to write a romance that gets really deep into labor issues in professional sports. I'm like really into labor issues and unions in my non-romance writing life, but I think it'd be really interesting. But putting aside the whole labor mess that is professional sports, just the dehumanization of the bodies and minds and spirits of these people who you know, have been given these gifts and are playing a game. I mean, they're just games. But they're like games that are worshipped at a certain level in our culture. And that combination of like worship and dehumanization is really horrifying. Like there's a lot about professional sports that's really beautiful and really wonderful and exciting, both for fans and players, I think. But there's also like, for me, there's like a real horror aspect to it, which I think you get a little of in Too Much Man, where, you know, it's not a spoiler, it happens before the book starts, where the hero's career has been ended in one play. And I have, you know, we've all seen that happen to players, especially people who are hockey fans. Happens in football. I'm sure it's happened in baseball. And that's some like horror level stuff, you know. That's like really awful. And the hero, Gavin, ends up, he has a disability that he will probably have for the rest of his life. And he's trying to deal with that adjustment from going from this like worshipped athlete to this retired person struggling with some physical disabilities, at the same time as he's dealing with the emotional and, you know, spiritual aspects of having your whole life change in like 2 seconds. And that's a very common story in professional sports. And I think it's really a good lens to look at the entirety of professional sports through, where like, what's the risk? What are we doing to these people? What are the risks that this worship and this dehumanization forces on these people? And what does that mean for them as individuals and humans? What does it mean for their families? What does it mean for their futures, their partners, their children? I think it's like, I don't know how I could not write a book about an athlete without getting into those issues. I just don't think I'd be able to do it. And I think romance is such an ideal place to explore those issues, because we are so used to dealing with the nuances of feelings and emotions and life changes and redemption and finding happiness like where you are. So finding happiness regardless of where you are in life. I think that that's like a really beautiful lens to look at the things that make me really furious about sports. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, that's very well said. Rachel, have you come up with an answer, or Katie, is there anything that you want to respond to?
No,
there?
I mean, everything that Katie said is yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I've always been pretty interested and try to make myself very aware of the darker side of the sport that I love, like all of the darker sides, which include, you know, the way that they are dehumanized, and the way that their bodies are completely destroyed for entertainment, to you know, the toxic masculinity that's so entrenched in hockey culture, you know, from a very young age here in Canada, for sure. The kind of assimilation of hockey players into this like kind of soldier like way of thinking, the way that they're coached, like, yeah, to be as men, not just as hockey players. You know, all of that I think enters into my writing a bit. And then yeah, obviously the rampant homophobia, misogyny, rape culture, all of that come into my books. You know, I don't go too heavily into it because I try to keep my books fairly light, but it's definitely, the themes are there, and I think that they're really important. I mean, yeah, as somebody who's been a hockey fan basically my whole life, I've had to like kind of reconcile a love of the sport, in particular of men's and NHL hockey, with, you know, all of the badness, the fact that, you know, as a woman, there's not a lot of respect for women coming out of any of that culture. And yeah, so it's kind of like my values are not reflected in the sport that I love. So I guess writing these books gave me a chance to put some of my values into the sport that I love.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes romance, for me personally, kind of a good, I guess, outlet for kind of like working through some of those kind of like value misalignments, as a, progressive feminist who is, working in a queer space. How do I reconcile that, sincere love that I have for sports, hockey, yes, but also, of many other sports that I have passionately followed in my life. These are certainly not issues that are limited to hockey. Is kind of how do I make space in those narratives and kind of reclaim some sense of kind of joy, community, for people who might historically have been kind of excluded. I mean, historically and also presently, very excluded from kind of like that, from that kind of joy and from that community, or certainly have felt that they are. So yeah, if anyone ever figures out how to reconcile the joy and the potential of sports communities, sports fandom, with the let's say grinding reality of yet another Twitter notification about yet another sexual assault scandal, I would love to hear it. That's maybe me getting a little too real in this panel, because the level in my Prosecco glass is dwindling. But yeah, so I think it is time, however, to turn a little bit lighter. As Rachel noted, we do like to keep things light in romance, and I don't want this to be like a deep dive into us therapizing each other about professional sports. But yeah, I would just love to know, Katie and Katie, you both published your first books within the last year, which is very, very exciting. And Rachel, you can feel free to reflect back to when you were a young baby writer as well. But what was one thing that you wish you'd known before your book went live?
I'll tackle this one because we are with the queen of timelines here, Rachel. I wish I had done much better timelines, and like I was like, oh, series, I have to set that up 4 books. Oh no, I haven't planned it all. So I'm at this point where I was like, I have multiple characters with the same name. I need to fix this. I need to like make a big like chart of sort of when things happen to kind of be clear about it. So maybe that's some of that's a little bit procedural. But I think that that really helps. I did have a friend who's also she also writes baseball romance, Sierra Dean writes baseball romance, and was like, hey, you need to make a series Bible, even if it's only book 1, like write everything down, because you will not remember what color their eyes are in 2 months. And you think you will forget, you won't forget it. You have already forgotten. So some of it was just some of the technical aspects, getting myself together a little bit. So Rachel, please teach us your secrets.
I've never made a timeline in my life. I'm a total pantser.
I don't know. Calendars or something like,
yeah, I do plot the individual books in Google Calendars, and then for the ones that overlapped, I did a bit of that. But yeah, no, I my advice is make a series Bible from book 1, because I wish I'd done that, because I did not.
Me neither. So oops. How about you, Katie? What did you learn through your debut author experience?
I don't think I can top that, and I definitely agree. I mean, I've only written the 2 books, but I had to go, when I was writing book 2, I had to go back to book 1 and like put back together the timeline for the heroine of book 2, and what like some stuff had happened with her family during book, or like before book 1. And I was like, I don't remember. And she's like a graduate student, and I couldn't remember like when she graduated college, or like how long she'd been in grad school. Like that's really important when you're talking about what she's working on. So yeah, I mean, at the time I wrote book 1, I was a complete pantser, so it like never occurred to me to even do an outline or anything, which would have been real helpful. I do more plotting now, which means that I have more to refer back to, but I also wish that I had kept better track of, like, especially timelines, because you're just not going to remember, like, was that 2 years, 3 years? Like, but if you get it wrong, someone's going to notice.
Yep.
Yeah. They sure do. Yeah. And if I was at like 5 books or 6 books, I mean, I would be an absolute mess. Like, I don't know. I can't even remember like what my main characters' names are, like, while I'm writing the book. So that's definitely a thing. I don't know. I felt pretty prepared for having my book debut. I also didn't know any better. So like, if I was missing something or if something didn't happen, like, don't tell me because I didn't notice.
Yeah, I definitely felt like that too. Not to pop in with my own answer here, but I think the answers we've gotten so far have been awesome, but I focused a little bit more on kind of like the technical side. But for me, I feel like I wish I had known a little bit more that it was okay to like not feel excited and happy that my book was debuting. Because I feel like all we ever, or at least all I had ever seen was, the joyous Twitter posts and like the triumphant blogs and the, glowing reviews. But I was like a little stress ball. Writing is just such a like personal thing for me. And it really kind of had to like wrap my head around, moving what has been, historically such a personal practice into a little bit more of a public sphere. And that it was okay to like not be just like over the moon excited. Like, I certainly had another glass of Prosecco or 5. I certainly celebrated. But for me, it was just like a relief to get it out into the world versus kind of like something that was so much to be celebrated, which, like, obviously if you feel unparalleled joy and excitement and love for that book, I absolutely like love that for you. But for me, it was really helpful once I heard from a couple of other authors when I was like, am I doing this wrong? Like, very, very tentatively in a few DM threads, they're like, oh no, I feel the same way. But it's just kind of like that public performance of uncomplicated joy that I really struggled with.
Yeah, I would also just add to that, like, it's okay also that if you're someone who just doesn't find book launches that exciting, like,
Yeah.
I mean, everyone was like, that day, everyone's like, you must be so excited. You must be so excited. But I had finished that book like a really long time ago. And I was already writing the second one. I was like, this book doesn't belong to me anymore. Like, I'm really happy it's out. And yes, I was like a little excited, but it wasn't like the most exciting thing ever because I'd already kind of moved on and I already viewed that book as like not belonging to me anymore. So I think it's like, it's okay if like actual book launch day is just sort of like, oh good, it's out, and not like this overwhelmingly unbelievably exciting thing.
Yep. I worked in the morning and then I went to the barn in the afternoon. That was,
it's
that
like
was
a
my fun
day.
day. Yeah, it was
it's
a
like
day.
a regular day.
It was a day. Yeah.
I read some quote was books are abandoned to the public, and that I kind of internalized.
That's a great quote.
Yeah, and I was just like, because you're right, the book's been done for a while. The only thing you're going to be able to gain by rereading it at that point is figuring out all the things you want to fix.
Oh my God.
Like,
so
I'll
many.
probably reread my own books in a couple of years. Like, when there's enough distance and when I'm like, it's gone, it's done, it's abandoned. I like to go back and sort of do that as a reflection of like, well, you learned a lot about pacing. And stuff like
Always
that.
A learning process.
Yeah, so it's sort of doing it as a reread, but like a reflective reread, not a hey, that was pretty good. So some of that too. But yeah, to just
give yourself the credit.
But it's abandoned. It's just abandoned to the public, and it's sort of, it feels a little like I've just left an EPUB file in the road. But I think that there is a point where you have to say like, it's art, and the point of art is to have is people's interaction with that art, and not necessarily the process of creating it. And so that's kind of, I think, where I kind of landed in the first year, and to stop naming people Jake because I have too many of them.
That's a great takeaway.
Realistic though.
It's so realistic, especially in sports.
Yeah.
All right, so we're getting towards the end of our time together, and we did promise the audience some book recommendations. So as kind of our last question before we do some final wrap up, what have y'all read recently that you have enjoyed that you would like to share with our listeners? And I have mentioned that I just read Katie and Katie's Arcs, so I would say definitely be on the lookout for Fire Season and oh my God, it's the Firebird series. What's the name, Katie? I'm sorry, I'm so
Oh,
unprepared.
it's Too Hot to Touch. I can't
Too Hot
remember
to
the names
Touch.
of my books
Yeah.
either.
I was like, is it too much? And then in my
It's
mind,
too
just went
something.
blank.
Too much to
something.
touch.
Yeah.
Too something.
Too
Yeah.
Hot to Touch. So those are both great. But other than that, I just finished while I was at the beach, The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes by Kat Sebastian, which was
reading that.
just delightful. So for anyone in our audience who has not heard about how wonderful this book is,
Oh my
go
God,
read it.
it's so good. It's such a joy.
It's just so delightful, just like
So good.
genuinely, just like made my heart so warm.
I'm looking
yeah.
at my Kindle to see what I read recently because I cannot remember a single book that I've ever read.
I'll
That
just say
is
I also
always what
just read
happens.
Fire Season and Too Hot to Touch and nailed it. And yeah, they were both really, really good. And I'm also reading The Perfect Crimes of Marion Hayes right now. So trying to think of something new.
One brain cell vibrating around these Zoom squares.
I know. I'm trying to think like 'cause I've also been reading Mary Renault's Alexander the Great trilogy. So that's an old blast from the past, right?
Fantastic recommendation though. It helps the youths who I'm sure are not tuned into our panel, but
reading a lot of Mandalorian fanfic.
Oh yeah, that's the best. I write that too. It's really great. It's very therapeutic. Like we think hockey players are like untouchable,
like the ultimate
like
hockey player.
unreachable. Like the Mandalorian is like basically
Literally.
a can that you need a can opener for, which is absolutely my kind of man. The book I'm reading right now is actually called Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, which is not a romance, but I highly recommend it.
Sounds very relevant
Marie
to the
Brown.
genre.
Yeah, I actually like really, it just was recommended to me today and I immediately started reading it. I don't know what I'm reading. I did read, and I also read Fire Season, which was so good. Yeah, I don't know what I read.
That's a great question. I don't
I'm like,
know
oh my
either.
God, what have I read? Oh, you know what I read that was really, really good? That is nothing like our books at all is The Bride Goes Rogue by Joanna Shute. I highly recommend that whole series. If you like historicals, this is an American historical series,
Love that.
which is really great.
And I guess I'll chime in. If you see me glancing around, I put my Kindle nearby so that I would have it because I can't ever remember
You guys are
a
smart.
title, who wrote it. No, but I can't find the Kindle now. It's probably under a blanket. So I like to read like 5 books at once. I'm very, very deeply chaotic in my reading habits. So right now I'm reading an arc of The Romance Recipe by Ruby Barrett, who's also a Karina author.
I want to read that book.
So I loved Hot Copy, which was the first one, which was CISMF. This one is FF. It's terrific. She's a spicy meatball, is what I'm gonna say. So I would say everyone go out and get that. I'm also reading The Forgotten Dead by Jordan L. Hawk, which is a trans ghost hunting book. So it's like, Katie, you talked about like the kitchen sink of everything that you want in a book. I'm like, this is the kitchen sink of everything I want in a book.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I had to stop reading it at night because I got scared because I'm secretly a wimp who loves ghost hunting. So those two, and I just read Alexis Hall's Lady for a Duke, which is a trans MF historical, which was also very excellent. And actually the first Alexis Hall book I ever read.
Oh my God, really? You have
I have like a
joy
giant,
in front of you.
Deep back catalog to go through.
It's a great back catalog to dig into.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. But those were all really some good recent reads.
All right. So before we sign off, I don't think we've had any questions come in through the chat, but just real quick, before we sign off, where can people find you online if they want to keep in touch and learn more about your awesome new books?
Probably the best place for me is Instagram, and it's Rachel Reed Writes. I have a Discord server as well. That link is in the bio of the Instagram if you want to join that. And
Katie and I are both members, so come hang out with all of us.
We are.
It's become its own. Again, it's like I'm not needed here anymore. Like, you're on your own now. What was the other part of the question? What am I working on, or new book coming out, or
talk about that if you want. I just asked where people can find you, but
okay.
They can also
Never mind.
find you via your books. So
yes, that's it. I'm done.
Awesome.
I can be found on my website, which I think is katiejameswriter.com. And then I am on Instagram, Twitter, and also TikTok sometimes at Katie James Writer. Wow. I know I love TikTok, but I don't actually post that much, so it's nothing interesting. But I am like a complete Twitter trash panda, so that's probably the best place to find me.
I too am a Twitter trash panda, so I feel sports, it lends itself to being a Twitter trash panda.
Yeah.
By the way, Trash Pandas, real baseball team. So it's a minor league team. So yeah, you can get gear. I'm Katie Casey Writes on Twitter, Instagram. I technically have a Facebook that I go on once a week. But Twitter and Instagram are the best places to find me, and come hang out and talk about baseball, and a little bit of writing.
Awesome. And then I am at @KateNary_writes on Twitter very intermittently. I am not a Twitter trash panda, as it turns out. I find it very stressful, but I am there sometimes. So if you need to reach me, that is probably the best place to do it. So with that, thank you so much to our three panelists for sharing your time, your thoughts for this really great conversation. And also final thank you to Love Sweet Arrow for hosting. Obviously, we all love independent bookstores here. So for our audience, remember to check out lovesweetarrow.com to see more events and purchase all of the titles we've discussed, whether they are written by us or someone else. And remember that you can get 15% off of your order online or in-store all weekend with the code 3years. So again, thank you so much for having us. Thanks to the three of you for having this conversation. We've had a blast. I've had a blast. My Prosecco is nearly gone. So thanks for an excuse to do a little bit of drinking and talking about romance novels, which are two of my favorite things.
Thank you for moderating.
Yeah, thank you.
Happy to do it.